Hey, Rebecca. Hey,
Hey.
Josh. Hey, Mackenzie.
Hey,
How are you?
good. How are you?
I am tired.
Long day?
Yeah, I'm in Kentucky at
Are you
the,
still there?
yeah, I've been here for 10 days.
Oh my gosh.
We've been grading the research papers, the AP research papers.
Uh-huh.
So I'm an adjudicator, so it's been tough.
Have there been a lot?
We finished today. We had 16,000 papers to read.
How many did you have? Because you were basically judging when two people
Right.
didn't agree,
I
right?
think I read probably, I adjudicated close to 200 papers.
200? Oh my gosh.
We read for 8 hours a day. Yeah. It's fun, but it's exhausting. We finished all
I
16.
couldn't do it.
We finished at 4:49 today.
Good
Yeah.
grief.
Hey, Colleen.
Hi.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. A little tired. I'm still in Kentucky. I drive home tomorrow. So I've been at the AP reading for the research papers.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So it's a good experience, but I was just telling Josh that I've probably read about 200 papers. Yeah, so that's a lot of research papers.
Yep.
So let's see. I know some people emailed me that they were not going to get on tonight because the elementary and the special ed people they're at Big Island Elementary School doing a practicum. So they have to be there at 7:30. So it's an early morning for them. So we might have a fewer number of people joining us, but that's okay. What time is it? 9:01. We'll give them a few more minutes. Anybody have any specific questions right now?
I was kind of confused with the whole bilingual, like the steps. It just seemed like a lot of different processes to go through in order to identify that in a child.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes. And we used to have an ESL program as part of our grad program, but unfortunately, Virginia doesn't require a teaching license for ESL anymore. But so what they're doing now, because now they are low, I'm just looking some things up for you. They're low on the number of ESL teachers that they have. So now you can take the Praxis 2 for English for second language learners and add that onto your license, which is
okay.
kind of nice, though it's a tough test.
Yeah.
But let's talk a little bit about that. Let me look up here where they have, I'm going to my reference section here. So did you have just in general a question or something specific? Josh?
I guess my biggest question is what all is the teacher expected to figure out in that situation? From what I understood from the interview, it's mainly kind of evaluating the student and kind of passing along the information we obtained from the student. So
Well,
I guess
not necessarily, yes. So the ESL teachers will do an evaluation, but in the Virginia area, they're doing more than assessment. They're teaching, right? So
okay.
you would also take on a teaching capacity. And it really depends. Like, for instance, Northern Virginia has a very large population of students where English is their second language. Harrisonburg, around JMU, they hire a lot of ESL teachers. And it really depends, because typically in an ESL classroom, you're having students of different languages, right? So other than California uses a different approach to English language learners. They do bilingual education rather than ESL education, and it's different. So if you're doing bilingual, that means for about half of the day you're with a teacher who speaks your language, and then and that teacher is helping you learn English, but that teacher also speaks in your native language. And then for the other parts of the day, you'll be in an English immersion type of classroom, right, with your native English speakers. That tends to work a little bit better. It helps children kind of acculturate to English, but in our area, we don't have that. Now, one of our student teachers 2 years ago, she was teaching 5th grade at Harrymount Elementary School, and she had a child in her classroom that she had to teach, and he was ESL. And so what they did, they used a lot of the strategies. You use a lot of visual representations, but also the computer for translation, which is also a good approach, right? Because then the child, if the teacher's talking, it just allows the child to look things up. Or if the child's reading something, then they can become more independent and they can use the computer to translate. I would say in this area, it's pretty much, and I do have a video of a teacher that is in the classroom teaching. A lot of the videos I have are on VHS tape, and the IT tells me that if they copy them to a CD, it destroys the visibility. But I'll see if I can go online and get something. So I'm just going to a resource that I have here. A lot of it is, if you kind of think about it, in learning a new language, if you think about how a young child learns English, you use a lot of the same strategies, right? So if you think about how a baby learns the language, so how do children learn English?
Phonetically?
Not at first. Anybody else chime in? If you've worked with young children, babies or toddlers, how are they learning our language?
They just mimic what they hear, what we say.
Yes, they mimic. And what else do we use? Think of a baby.
Books with pictures. What's the next thing?
Yeah, pictures, but go a step earlier.
Oh.
Before pictures. So if I'm
like visuals in general?
What?
Just like visuals in general?
Yeah, so if I'm feeding my child and I want them to learn the word fork, what am I going to do?
Oh, you say fork and you hold up a fork.
Exactly. So those of you who have had my math class, that's called what? Now there's nobody on that's had the math class, right? Okay. That's the concrete level, right? So if we're teaching new skills, let's say in math, or we're teaching English language learners, there are 3 levels. It's called concrete, pictorial, abstract. You always start with the concrete. So the best way to teach children English is they need experience with concrete things. So if you're teaching them, about things in their environment, right? If you're teaching them about things in the school and you want them to learn some of that vocabulary, you're going to take a walk around the school, right? So that they're getting that kind of exposure to the concrete object. So in the cafeteria, this is the cafeteria line, and you're teaching them all of those kinds of things. So anything that can be concrete, taking the outdoors, if you're teaching them environmental kinds of vocabulary, right? So, but then sometimes you're teaching vocabulary that you don't have the concretes and that concrete objects, and that's when you'll move to pictorial, right? So, Josh, you didn't have me for math and science. Josh Yeast, who'd you have for math and science at the undergrad level? Dr. L?
Yes, I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
Wait, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, we did. It was Dr.
Okay. Did she go over concrete, pictorial, and abstract?
No. That doesn't, I mean, it sounds familiar, but I don't think it was there.
Okay. So, but same thing when you're learning mathematical skills. It parallels pretty well with learning English as a foreign language, right? Or so you would move up. You would, if you don't have concrete objects, you would use pictures. A lot of teachers use video. That works a little bit better with children. And they draw pictures, they illustrate, and then the abstract is the written word, right? So if I have cards around the room and I have the word door, and I have it taped to the door, I have the word window taped to the window, that's a combination of concrete and abstract together, okay? When you're evaluating the students, a lot of times you're evaluating, there's a couple different things that you have to kind of take into consideration. So there's a difference between reading and writing and spoken language, right? So oftentimes students feel more comfortable reading the foreign language or writing the language, right? So Josh, props, have you worked with any children that are learning French?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've tutored some. Usually the biggest fear is trying to pronounce.
Exactly.
They're a lot more reluctant. Mm-hmm.
Yes, and that's the exact same thing that happens with children who are learning English. They're going to be very reluctant to speak. They feel more comfortable reading and writing because it's less of a risk, right? They don't have to overtly let people know that they don't know what they're doing, right? And we do not teach foreign language very well in the United States, right? When do we begin having children learn a foreign language?
8th grade.
Yeah. Maybe 7th grade, but 8th grade, right? Which is way too late. So if you're teaching, so there's going to be a difference. If you get a child who, say, moves here from Mexico and comes into your classroom and they're 5 years old, they're starting kindergarten. Typically, that child is going to be speaking English in about 3 to 4 months. If you have a child and you're an 8th grade teacher, you've got a more difficult job because they've learned their language very well. They can read in their language, they can write in their language, and they don't take risks like a 5-year-old. A 5-year-old is going to try to speak English whether they make a mistake or not. It's kind of like how they learn to read. You know, they don't have those inhibitions yet. So the younger the child, the more quickly, if they're in an immersive environment, they will learn English. You'll oftentimes get the opposite effect if you have middle schoolers or high schoolers that are thrown into an environment where they feel uncomfortable. And their learning of the language will slow down because they will not they'll try to avoid speaking the language for fear of sounding silly to their peers, right? Because we know that adolescents are very worried about the peer group. And they're not going to believe you as a teacher that it's okay to take that risk because what's most important to them is fitting in with the peer group, right? Yeah. Let me see. I'm still trying to look up in this book. It's not too easy here. What else? Did I answer your question, Josh?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. I didn't bring the book that I wanted. Most likely, in this region, an ESL teacher will work between 2 or 3 schools. So you don't get a lot of support. They'll mostly do some evaluations, though the evaluations can be helpful, but sometimes not really very helpful, right? You're trying to gauge how much English they know. And you have to be really careful because they might know more English than they're willing to let you know, right? They might feel intimidated or worried or scared in a new environment. It really depends on their background, right? And if so, you can imagine if you have a child, let's take the children from Mexico, right? The current immigrants from Mexico, there's been a lot of trauma there. So if you have a child coming into your school and let's say that they've been taken away from a parent and now they're living in the foster care system, and there are about 800 children that were taken away from their parents and are living in foster care in the US, you have an uphill battle, right? If they've been they're going to be placed in a public school, and because of that trauma, their experiences are going to inhibit their learning of English, right? So why? Why are they going to be more reluctant to interact with English?
Well, they'll associate English with the bad things that have happened to them.
Exactly. Exactly. So you as a teacher, you're the bad guy, right? And they're not going to trust. When a child doesn't have trust in your classroom, then there's very little learning is occurring, right? So I always tell teachers that forget about trying to teach them English maybe the first month. The most important thing is for you to develop a good relationship with the students in your classroom, get them to a point where they trust you, and then the learning will occur much more quickly. Yeah, so it really depends on how much trauma the child has experienced as to how they're going to learn in the classroom. And that doesn't go just for students where they've immigrated, but it could be for any child of any trauma, right? You're going to see a decrease in trust, a decrease in learning, right? So you face that as a teacher when you have a child who lost a parent. If teachers also experience the same thing when violence has hit the school, whether it's somebody, say a child in the school, like EC Glass recently had to deal with one of their students was shot and killed, right? So the other students that are close to that child experience trauma. Their learning is going to decrease until that trauma has been dealt with, right? So that's another thing that has to be taken into consideration to try to get, and it's very hard with immigrant children, especially now, right? Parents, if the child is here illegally, or the parents are here illegally, even if the child was born in the US, there's still fear from the parents about what might happen, right? Because the laws and regulations are changing, and the rhetoric out there in this current political climate really has undocumented individuals afraid of what might happen, right? That they might be deported and their child is going to be here with nobody to take care of them and put into the foster care system. So those evaluations, lots of times they'll interview parents, and typically the parents do not speak English. Oftentimes schools will bring in a native speaker to try to interview the parents, but right now you're going to have very little cooperation from many of your immigrant populations, especially the Hispanic population, right? They're very worried about what would happen, right? If they talk, even if they have a green card, they might have relatives that don't. And so as teachers, you need to make sure that you stay abreast of what's happening politically and how that might affect the children in your classrooms, right? I always tell teachers that education is the most political institution that we have. And a lot of teachers they don't realize that. It's seeped in politics. From every faction of education is tied to some kind of political issue, whether it's how the teachers are licensed, whether it's how the students are evaluated and tested, the curriculum, the administration, the funding. Every piece of what happens in the classroom is connected to some political agenda. Okay, I got off on a little tangent there, but it's important. 246. There's not a lot in this book that I brought with me. What other questions do we have? I'm looking this up to see what they're going to say. This is the book that I usually use in the class that I didn't have you buy because it cost $250.
I kind of have a two-part question. I'm sorry, I don't want to like take over everything.
That's okay. Would
ESL be beneficial for a foreign language teacher? And along with that, what would you expect to see on the ESL praxis exam?
I have not looked at it. One of the students from last year, Megan Swithers. Do you know Megan Swithers? She just graduated. She's still in town.
Mm-hmm.
She looked at it. You could just go online. They'll have practice tests on ETS. I think they have 1 or 2 posted. But take a look at it. She looked at it. She said, you really have to study. We don't really go into that much depth about working with children where English is their first language. It's just one of the topics that we cover in this particular class. You'll also touch on it in your reading class. So when you take your reading class, if you're elementary or secondary, the secondary people are taking reading in the content area with Professor Parker. She'll go over some strategies about working with children where English is their second language and they can't read your textbook in your class. So what do you do with that, right? But take a look at it. I haven't looked at it in a while because it's fairly new, because Virginia didn't exist before, and I think it's one of the newer praxis tests. But Megan said it involved quite a bit. And I'm not an ESL expert. We had another faculty member who taught in our ESL program. It's not really my area of expertise, but Robbie Parker will have some experience with it because she's a reading coach and she coaches a lot of different teachers. I might be able to bring in a speaker, a teacher who does teach English as a second language, but most of the teachers in this area are not certified. They just kind of were chosen by their principal to help the children where English was not their first language. So there's not a lot of support in this area for that. But yes, if you probably want to take a look at it and see how much prep it would take to, yeah. So was that your second part of your question?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Thank you.
What else is on your mind out there?
Well, now if those teachers aren't really certified in teaching ESL, is that proven to be like efficient at all?
Children are really resilient. It's usually the children will learn the language in spite of the interventions that they get, right? So the little boy in the classroom that one of our students was in, his teacher, she said, luckily, I speak Spanish. She says, I really only spoke a little bit of Spanish, but she said, my Spanish has gotten a lot better because she started brushing up on her Spanish so that she could talk to him. And I was in there a couple of times, and he was very good at using the computer. He was really good at he was comfortable enough in the classroom that he would raise his hand if he needed help. other children would help him just automatically. And and this was a 5th grade classroom, he seemed very comfortable in the classroom. So it really, it's on an individual basis.
That was a dumb question. Not a dumb question. I was just like, you just said that. Nah, that's weird. Just
Yeah. Yeah, it's not a dumb question, but yes, and that's because there's usually very little funding, right? So think of the population we're talking about, right?
Okay.
And it makes a difference. So for instance, Paul Monroe used to have a very large population of Swedish children and French children. Okay, so the Swedish children were here working for Ericsson cell phone company, and the French children were here working for Framatome, which was and Arriva, so 2 engineering companies, right? But they had a much easier time assimilating into the US culture and into the classroom, and they had a much easier time speaking English. Can you guess why?
Because their parents had to speak English.
Yeah. Parents spoke English, and their parents are also educated with a college degree, right? Engineers. And many times both parents were engineers and they were both over here working. So their parents spoke English at home. Even some of the children never spoke English, but they learned English very quickly because the parents knew in preparation to come here, right? First of all, they're going to work with them with English. And second, they could help them at home with their English, right? So that's, it's different. And that's why as a teacher, you need to find out what is the background of the children, right? So those children have a leg up, right? But our immigrant children that come because they're fleeing from either terrorist countries or most of the Mexican immigrants are leaving because of gang and drugs, and they're escaping that whole culture to try to make a better life for their children. So it really makes a difference as to why the children are here, as to what kind of approach you need to take and how comfortable the children are going to be in your classroom and willing and comfortable to learn English, right? So the children whose parents work at Arriva, they have a very positive view about the US, right? Because their family is coming here and that it's very positive. They're in they are comfortable, they're safe, they're here legally, and they don't have some of those worries that some immigrant children that are refugees have, right? And sometimes that will, the refugee population will make a difference in your school. So in Roanoke, there is a refugee center, and I'm trying to think, maybe Venezuela and I can't remember the other country, but so there's a refugee center where when the people come here, they go to Roanoke, and the center in Roanoke helps find the family homes and helps find the parents employment, right? Now that's also a really nice connection, because then you as a teacher have another resource to go to get information about the children and get information about the family. And they have another support system outside of the school. So it's really nice when you move into a school division and say that to kind of learn about your community, are there resources for refugees? Is there a refugee center in the city, right? Because of course then Roanoke has a large population of immigrant children. So ESL teachers are more prevalent in the schools because they have a larger population. Bedford County in Forest has a large population of Korean children because of Liberty University. So Liberty brings families from South Korea they often come and they're in their ministry program. So, and for some reason, I'm not really sure why, but they moved to Forest And actually Liberty University has apartments that they rent, and then now they have them in the Forest area. So there's a larger population at Thomas Jefferson Elementary School and Forest Elementary School. But I think the ESL teacher moves from one school to the other. But it's mostly left up to the classroom teachers to figure out how to teach the children and make sure that they are at least improving some of their skills. And again, just remember those three things, right? Concrete, pictorial, abstract. And teach language the way that you would teach a young child to speak English, right? What else is on your minds? Any other assignments? I want to talk a little bit about parent-teacher conferences, but I want to share with you an example of probably things not to do and what are good strategies to do. So I'll tell lots of stories about my children. Now they're all grown up, they're all adults. My youngest is 20, but I have great stories from when they were children. So my youngest, Jack, when he was in 2nd grade, and Jack is my social child. He's also my nonconformist child. He's not afraid to question a teacher's tactics, right? So he's very, very bright. We walk into parent-teacher conferences, my husband and I, and here's something that's really irritating. So if you teach little children, when you have parent-teacher conferences, bring big chairs into your classroom so that the parents can sit in big chairs, right? Because you walk into the 2nd grade classroom and the teacher's sitting in her big chair, and then the parents sit down and they're in these little tiny chairs, right? So it's this gives you this power differential, right? We walk in the door of the classroom and they're out in these trailers at Forest Elementary School. We weren't 3 steps into the doorway when the teacher said, and she went like this, she goes, "It's not my fault." First thing out of her mouth, "It's not my fault." We looked at each other like, okay, so what happened? What's not her fault? Report cards had come home, and so did their standardized tests. So in 2nd grade, they take the Stanford 10. Okay, so they had taken a Stanford 10 and they had report cards. Can you imagine can you think of a scenario where she might have said that? Why do you think she said that when we walked into the classroom? Report cards, standardized test.
Maybe his scores on the standardized tests were higher, or were high, and his grades were pretty low.
Exactly. He was off the charts on the standardized test. Okay, and she was giving him, like in 2nd grade they have N's and S's and U's, like U is unsatisfactory or something. So he had all these U's on his report card, and I don't put much value in report cards anyway. I don't really think they tell you much. You know, what does an A mean? What does a B mean when you're in 2nd grade? Or what does an N or a U mean, right? It doesn't mean anything. So we sat down and so she says to us, okay, here's his standardized test. And she knew, right? She knows me. And she was being defensive because she didn't really have a plan to help explain what was happening in the classroom. Because I know that she and Jack were battling, right? He's got a hard head, and when a teacher tells him to do something and he thinks it's silly, he's going to tell her, this is just dumb, right? And that's it. Like, that's exactly what was happening. That he was bored in the classroom, and this is something you have to be careful about with children. If bright children are bored, what's going to happen?
They're going to act out sometimes.
Yes, they are going to act out, right? So he's bored, he's doing whatever a 8-year-old boy who's extremely active and very bright is going to do. And it took, to this day, most of his negative stories come from that experience in second grade, right? So he, to this day, whenever he has his phone, probably once a month I hear from him, hey, I remember the time when Mrs. Loy told me when I didn't want to do my math, they called Mad Minutes. Does anybody ever experience Mad Minutes in elementary school where they give you a sheet and you've got a minute to addition, subtraction facts, you have a minute to complete them? Worthless activity. Don't ever do that when I'm around. So he told her that why do we have to go so fast? What, he didn't see the point, right? And she said to him, because, what do you think? You're going to carry a calculator around with you your whole life? Because she told him, because he said to her, I'll just use a calculator. And she said to him, you're not going to have a calculator in your pocket your whole life. Well, you all carry a calculator around with you every day, right? It's on your cell phone. And that really irritated him because at 8 years old, he knew he was right. His father made cell phones. That was his job. Right? So here's this 8-year-old child, but you can imagine, rather than validating some of his concerns, she battled him. So for an entire year, they were battling back and forth, right? And he was relentless. He was not going to give up. So you do have to kind of be careful. So think about that scenario. If you're a teacher and you have a child and they have high standardized test scores and low performance in the classroom, what would you do, or what would you say to that parent? How could you set it up to be a good experience?
I mean, you could start by saying hello.
Yeah, that'd be a good start.
I mean, I think you could say that was she just not sure that he was bored, or did she not pick up on that he was bored, or?
She has an authoritarian approach to teaching. You do what I say because I told you to. You sit in rows and you're quiet. And you do the work I tell you and you don't question me.
I feel like in that scenario, if it was obvious that this kid does know his stuff, but it's not showing on mine, I would say I'm doing something wrong, and obviously I'm not challenging him well enough, so I need to change something so he stops getting his U's and S's and whatever.
Yeah. So that reflective piece. Okay, this teacher, she wasn't going to do that. She did back off a little bit because I think she realized when she saw the scores on the standardized test that something wasn't going right. I don't even think we were going to ask her about that. I find, to be honest with you, I don't think there's one teacher where I value the parent-teacher conference. In all of my 3 children's school experience, that's not a lot, right? And that was a teacher who, she was a 4th grade teacher, and she had Jack, and she had my middle son, Casey. She did not have Leah, but she had the children put a portfolio together and then shared their portfolio. And she just said, this is the work that Jack wanted you to see when he came into school, when you came in to meet with me. And that was probably the only time when we went home, because this happens all the time. The parents will go home, and what's the first thing the kids say to them after the parent-teacher conference? What did the teacher say about me, right? Did they say bad things? Did they say good things, right? Because it's all this whole secretive thing. But that teacher set it up. There was nothing secret. She told them, here's what's in your portfolio. Then she would always ask each one of them, is there something you would like me to tell your parents that you really think you should work on. So, and the child would write that down in their portfolio. So there were no secrets, because the whole parent-teacher conference thing, I don't know why it has to be set up to be so secretive, right? It's almost this, children are afraid that the teacher's talking to the parents. There was a school that I worked in Michigan, and I really liked this approach. The parent-teacher conference was really a parent-teacher-child conference. The child was part of the conference. The child picked their artifacts of what they wanted to share, and the child sat there and walked through all their artifacts, and they had to have artifacts of things that they were very, very good at. They had to have artifacts of things that they were just okay at, and they had to have artifacts of things that they still wanted to work on or things they needed to learn. And the child ran the meeting. And it was a wonderful approach, because it was, of course, we had more than, every teacher gets like 10 minutes to talk to the parents anyway, so the whole thing is meaningless. And some of you may have had experience, I don't think we have anybody that's been teaching in a school yet. I just lost my train of thought. What was I going to say? Give me a minute. Nope, it's gone. What was I talking about? I've been up since 5 o'clock this morning. I don't know. It's gone. Other question? What was I talking about, Josh?
Oh, you're asking us if we had experience with parent-teacher conferences. And then right before that, you're talking about how the student led it.
Yeah, but I was going somewhere with that thread. Okay, it was one of my tangents, so let's go on to the next question. But parent-teacher conferences are a challenge, and you as a teacher really need to try to reframe them for parents. And there are really creative things to do for parent-teacher conferences. And connected to that is also, you'll always, especially if you teach elementary or middle school, you'll have, open orientation night for parents, okay? That's another wasted opportunity, right? I dreaded going to these parent open houses, because it's open. You come in and you sit at your child's desk, okay? And there might be a draw. Usually they have the children draw a picture of themselves or something. I don't know why they do that. And then you hear about the rules of the classroom. I went to this one open house. So they're all at the beginning of the school. So the children have been in school for about a month. And then all the parents come in to learn about, what the school year is going to be like with this new teacher. This one teacher went into excruciating detail about every rule that she had in her classroom. And then she went into this, like an oral argument about what we should send in for snacks and what we should not send in for snacks. And she went through all these, like she said, now applesauce. The little applesauce containers that have the peel-off lid? She went through this whole explanation of why she doesn't want those sent into school. And she had one in her hand. She was giving us an example. She says, now see, when I open it, it's really easy, but imagine the kids open them and the applesauce goes flying all over the place. I think she talked about applesauce for 5 minutes. Right? Right. And that parent, we're all sitting there going, why are we here? All you have to send is send a note home and say, don't send in applesauce containers because they make a mess. Right? But some teachers kind of get off on these tangents. So when I was teaching a 5th grade classroom at Darrington Elementary School, we had one of these open house nights. And this was before I had children. Yes, before I had children. And I didn't like how these open houses had gone the previous year. I thought it was a waste of time. So I'm a hands-on teacher, and I had, even in 5th grade, the kids were at centers, all kinds of hands-on activities. And parents complain, right? because they want their children to come to school to learn. And many parents think learning is sit in rows, listen to the teacher, the factory model. So to get parents out of that paradigm, at opening night, they all had a newspaper that had job ads in it. And I had them go through those job ads and circle words that the employers were, the attributes they were looking for in their employees, right? And then I had them in groups, and they had to work with their group, and they had to write those down on a piece of chart paper. And then we talked about the attributes. And most of the things in job ads are not sit and be quiet, work independently, right? So if you think of job ads, and take a look at some, work as a team, good oral communication skills, can take on leadership, other kinds of cooperative kinds of skills, right? And the parents, so we go through those and they talk, I said, these are the attributes, these are the things your children are going to learn in this classroom. And that ended the questions about why do you have a woodworking center in your classroom, right? Why are they doing so much group work? I don't want my child tutoring other children, right? You'll get a lot of that when children work in groups. Some parents will complain if they believe their child is bright, and every parent of every child in your classroom thinks their child is bright, and they all are in their own way, but they will say, I've heard many times, I don't want my child tutoring other kids that don't know what they're doing, right? But that exercise ended all of that. And those are the kinds of things that you want to expose parents to. Like, how do the children learn in your classroom? And walk them through some of those things. And then your whole year will be a lot better. Right? It's all about building relationships. And you'll hear a lot of, I'm sure you heard some of it from Professor Woods in her class, right? Building relationships, working with colleagues, working with parents, working with administrators. Those are all skills that gifted teachers do really well, right? You can learn the content, and you can learn the instructional strategies as you go along. You can't learn how to reflect, or like Rebecca said, think about, maybe I'm doing something that isn't meeting this child's needs. What can I do to change myself for this child? Right? Rather than saying, it's not my fault. It's the child's fault. And I'm sure he was pretty sassy, but, he'd be less sassy if he was doing things that were more meaningful than sitting there doing a mad minute sheet. Oh, and by the way, she never backed off on the mad minute sheet, but he figured out, and this is what bright kids will do, they'll learn to work the system. So she didn't teach him math. She taught him how to cheat. He came home one day and he said, Mom, I want you to take this sheet to your office and make me 10 copies. And it was a mad minute sheet that she had given them for homework, because he had figured out that the practice sheet that she was giving them was the exact same thing she gave on Friday for the mad minute. And so I'm thinking, what is he doing? 10 copies? So he went through and he added them all up. He did the whole sheet. And then he learned the numbers. He memorized it. So he could go across the row. He had these 10 papers and he's just filling them in. And then he'd do another one and test himself. So by the end of the 10th sheet, he had all the numbers memorized. He went in that Friday, took his mad minute test, right? And all he's doing is remembering it's 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 4, 3, 2, 1, whatever. And he got 100. And she wrote on the paper, Jack, I'm so proud of you for studying so hard, right? And of course, he's thinking in his head, you are a fool, lady, right? And he comes home, I got 100. And I said, you memorized this, didn't you? He said, yeah, but I still got 100. And she thinks I'm great. And so I don't think she ever figured out that that is what he was doing. And so sometimes we think we're teaching children to do something, we're teaching them one thing when we're really teaching them another, right? She never had any idea that she was teaching my child how to cheat. And it worked, right? So we had to have a conversation at home about, that might not be the best way. Now to an 8-year-old, right? He's not really comprehending what I'm telling him, but because that could carry on, he could keep cheating the rest of his life, right? Just figure out the go around and he's good to go. So as teachers, always think of the unintended consequences of some of your rules or some of your procedures. And they still do mad minutes in schools. Josh, in your classrooms, did you ever see mad minutes? Because you were in elementary school. And Mackenzie, you were too.
I saw them when I had in the 5th grade. Yeah, Paul Monroe. Yeah, they're pretty common still, I must say.
Teachers think they work. I don't know why. In my opinion, you don't have to memorize any math facts. That's heresy in some classrooms, right? Can you do math without memorizing? Let's take your multiplication tables. How many of you can recite your multiplication tables one right after the other?
Yeah.
You can? Rebecca?
I remember doing the mad minutes for like addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think I asked why are we doing this, but I remember being told that it was so we could just like spit it out as quick as we could.
Right. And the incorrect assumption is the faster children can do their facts, the better they will be at mathematics. And that's research has disproven that, but it still is, right? Teachers don't use research. That's one of the reasons we have research in our program, so that you learn that research is meaningful. But as a child, a classroom I was in, it was you all stood up and then you had to say the facts. And if you got them wrong, you had to sit down. Right? So that, one, embarrasses kids. And it embarrassed me to no end because I got so nervous, I just couldn't even remember probably 1 + 1. I never learned my multiplication tables. I'm sure there are many fourth graders, well, yeah, 3rd, 4th, when they're doing multiplication, who could beat me hands down. I'm really good at statistics. I took calculus, I took pre-calc, I took trigonometry and geometry in New York, aced all the Regents exams, but I don't know my multiplication tables. You will not ever convince me that you must memorize your multiplication tables to be good in mathematics. The two skills are not related. One's arithmetic and one's mathematics, right? So as a teacher, just make sure you're kind of reflecting, in these practicums when you're writing your reflections, think about these things. Those of you who are at Big Island, not all of you are there. But even in your upcoming practicums in the fall, in your student teaching, those reflection pieces we really look at very carefully because we can tell who's going to be a super teacher by the way he or she writes their reflections. It's not just, this is what I did today, but it's like Rebecca and Mackenzie mentioned, how do I treat the children? What didn't work? How could I change myself to make tomorrow more effective, right? And those are the reflections that really create standout teachers. And I have found through the years that other than the research piece and the number of hours we have you work in classrooms, that reflection piece boosts our graduates a step above. That's why I always get calls. Do you have somebody for this position? Do you have, I just got a call for math the other day. So, you know, take those reflections seriously, whether it's this summer, in the fall, or during your student teaching. That's going to make you a better teacher. Anything else you'd like covered tonight? I forgot what I said in the email. Parents, ESL, and again, I'm not an expert on the ESL. Any other points? Everything going okay on the Moodle page? Somebody did mention something about, I think the ESL, I think leftover from last year was a discussion board, but you didn't need to do that. We have a discussion board coming up in one of the assignments. I think it's in the directions. Now, because everybody is on, everybody's on a different plan. I'm not making it so you have to complete things on my schedule, but I'm noticing there's a certain group of people who are completing things and there's a certain group of people who are not. So I'm going to start posting, you know, kind of reminders to keep caught up on your assignments and things. But I've been trying to go through and give feedback. But so far I haven't had a lot of grading to do. So if you have assignments that I haven't graded, that I have missed, email me. But I go through the Moodle page. For the last 2 days I haven't because I've been working late for AP. But, and I'm driving all day tomorrow, but I'm going to do more grading tomorrow night if you have recently posted stuff. Okay. Is it going smoothly so far? How do you like the online piece? Totally online.
I think it's convenient that we can kind of just work like at our own pace, that it's not like we have set deadlines, especially since we are doing it with other classes.
Right.
But I feel like also having like, if we had a a sit down part and we could have more of a discussion, that would be beneficial as well.
Mm-hmm.
I like that even though it's online, we have lots of videos and stuff, so it's not just textbooks and articles.
Right. Yeah. Good. Yeah, I try to put a lot of visuals because teaching is visual, right? You can only get so much from reading. Well, if
Very good.
say that again, Josh. I didn't hear you. You were a little muffled.
I was just saying I've never really been good at online classes, but this one's been a lot easier than previous ones I've had.
Okay.
Just because it's hard to keep on top of things sometimes on online, but I like how it's all flowed out.
Okay.
That makes it a lot easier.
Yeah. So I taught, this used to be a blended class. So I taught half online and half face-to-face. So I'm trying it totally online. We'll see how it works. I'll have you do you have to do the course evaluations for the college, but I'm also going to send out and post evaluation just so I can get an idea of what worked in the online class, what didn't work. So kind of keep notes of because I always make changes based on student comments, right? That's one of the reasons that in many of our education classes, we've decreased the number of textbooks because textbooks have gotten ridiculous, right? So this is the book that I usually use in this class, right? It's not a big book, $250, which, no, that's ridiculous. So because of the, internet and access to articles and things is much more economical just to post articles and things like that. All right, well, if there's no more questions, we'll say goodnight, and I'll be back next Tuesday, 8:30. I know it's getting kind of late. I see some yawns, and lots of people are not on, because I know those people doing Big Island have to get up at the crack of dawn. So have fun, and good night, and I'll talk to you soon. I'll be back on campus on Thursday.
Thank you.
Okay, good night.
Thank you. Night.
Good night. Oh, there's Mackenzie. I couldn't see you the whole time.
Oh, hi.
You were so quiet. Things going okay at Big Island?
Yeah, so far so good.
Good, good. I'll be there on Thursday morning. Okay.
You'll get to see our zoos.
Oh, good, good.
They're making model zoos of endangered animals.
Oh, nice. I love that. That's one of my favorite things to do is the summer camp. So
Yeah, it's been pretty good so far.
good, good. All right. Well, we'll say good night, and I'll talk to you on Thursday.
All right, see you Thursday.
Bye-bye.
Bye.